All right. We are live and we're doing a countdown. All right, we are ready to go. So, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another career clinic, our second one in April, actually. And only this time we're going to be focusing on doing a live informational interview with a good friend of mine, Edgar. We'll tell a little bit more about himself in just a moment here. But if you're not familiar with who I am, I'm of course going to introduce myself and what I do and why I do these career clinics every month. So my name is Manny Duenas, aka the Career Doctor. So I got my lab coat on today, right? That's my logo and everything. So yeah. So aka the Career Doctor. But during my 9 to 5, I work at a national nonprofit called Year Up. And at Year Up, I am the founding employment placement manager at our campus that is partnered with Facebook. And so I am serving the underserved community of young adults between the ages of 18 and 24 and helping them earn internships at Facebook. So at my site, we're actually teaching IT track and project management track. For me, I actually teach some courses while they're in the program. And I teach career development and interpersonal relations. So I really get to be a part of that journey of these students with even during like their internship and beyond that as well. So that's my 9 to 5, and what I'm up to outside of that as a career doctor when I put this lab coat on, I'm doing things like the career clinic and creating more access to resources for people to learn about different opportunities and jobs and everything in the realm of career development. Right, so we've had panels, we've had informational interviews, we've talked with career coaches on this career clinic, right? So that is why we do this. That's why I do this. So without further ado, let me pass the mic over to Edgar. And Edgar, if you can tell us, what you do for a living and how you got into this.
Sure, sounds good. So again, thanks for the introduction. My name is Edgar. What I do for a living is, I conduct clinical research. So my official title is Field Studies Project Specialist at Apple. But my last four or 5 years now, I've been in the medical device, clinical research world, which is essentially if you imagine those commercials when you probably see on TV where there's someone frolicking through the field, and they're talking about this medication and all these things that it can do, all those side effects. So before it can get to that point, before any company can actually promo it and have a commercial for it and just have that officially out to the public, they have to do what's called a clinical study to either prove it's safe and effective, to show it's safe and effective. That can take anywhere between 1 and 5 or 6 years. And so that's what I do for a living. I work with hospitals. I partner with them. They recruit patients and for these clinical studies.
Amazing. And how did you get it? How did you get into this career? Was it something you planned on doing? Tell us a little bit more about your background and your journey.
Yeah, so I graduated from Cal Poly in 2015 with a degree in biology, bachelor's degree in biology. Anatomy and physiology. I wanted to go to med school, but then I realized that really wasn't for me. And I think most people in the sciences, we all wanted to get into some sort of research. We all want to be scientists. And that was definitely without a doubt, I love doing that stuff. So doing any sort of hands-on work, any sort of really things that really change how we practice science, how we practice medicine in general, specifically focusing on helping people. And so I worked in labs for a couple of years out of college because that was something I was always really good at. And Cal Poly was very huge on hands-on learning. And then by chance, a friend of a housemate introduced me to clinical research. And when she explained what she did for work, I just immediately was that sounds exactly like what I really want to do. And so once I actually, she was actually able to get me an interview for a positioning that had opened with her company. And I was really fortunate to have, really immediately just stepped up, cranked out through my resume, polish it up as much as I could just to get my foot in the door. And yeah, and since then I've been in this industry for that long.
Amazing. So you mentioned, the degree that you earned at university. What university did you go to, and is the degree that you got related to what you're doing today? And do you need a degree to get into this type of work?
Yeah, so I went to Cal Poly SLO, graduated in 2015 with a Bachelor's of Science and concentration in anatomy and physiology. It's definitely helpful, but not a hard requirement. And I have this kind of slide that I can kind of quickly share that might be good to let's see.
Yeah.
Window. To kind of explain this a little bit further, so there's a couple of different positions within clinical research, and this is kind of how it's organized. And just kind of going through some of the roles. So this was the role I started off at, which was clinical trial coordinator, which is what CTC stands for, which is a bit more administrative. And for these two jobs, which are considered the more entry-level jobs, you don't actually really need a bachelor's degree. All you need is an associate's really, and then some sort of life science experience. And here's the kind of natural progression in the industry that you'll see, which is usually you'll spend 1 or 2 years in this position, just kind of understanding clinical research as a whole, kind of passively kind of absorbing that information. Then you become a senior, and then a clinical research associate, which is when you actually start interfacing with doctors and hospitals a lot more. And then again, a couple more years, you become a senior, and then lead CRA, which is you're kind of overseeing a group of clinical research associates, and then project manager, then program and director. And so the way and so for the CRA and up, actually for CRA, for the clinical research associate, it's strongly preferred for people who have a life science degree, or really just any sort of bachelor's degree, but it's not a hard requirement. I mean, if you start off in this position and you work your way up and you show that you're really understanding the information, as long as you're willing to take supplemental courses to really understand clinical research, you don't always necessarily need that, although it is helpful when it comes to things like pay. But and just the rest of this graphic kind of explains what clinical research kind of looks like, and just a very, very small sliver of it. So a company, which is like a medical device company, sponsors, or they pay for an entire study where they'll usually have a project manager who's dedicated to the study, and then the clinical trial coordinator is kind of like their assistant. And then from the operations level, you have all of these clinical research associates, and then the CRAs and the lead CRA. And sometimes you'll also hire a third party clinical research organization to help staff this level of operations. And this level right here will actually manage hospitals who then bring in patients who these teams have to qualify the hospitals and make sure that they're eligible to be kind of enrolling people in the study, that they have the research staff for that, and then they actually enroll the patients, and then kind of fast forward a year or so through the research, and then they start to kind of follow up the patients depending on what sorts of procedures or anything are doing. But this is the kind of logical progression, and this is very, very much kind of a very just one small sliver of it, because there's also tons of things like data management, biostats, which is also pretty cool. So depending on kind of where you want to go, there's a lot, but yeah, so that's kind of clinical research in a nutshell too, to kind of explain that.
So where do you fall currently, on that kind of that timeline that you showed of different positions? Where do you currently reside?
Yeah, so it's kind of so my role now at Apple, it's a bit more diverse, and even the title itself doesn't necessarily line up with any of those, and it's intentionally kind of like that because it's just a really mixed role. So I do a bit of kind of clinical research associate work. I do some administrative stuff. I do some project management stuff where I'm managing an external partner who manages hospitals, and so it's kind of a blend. But and so since this is outside of industry, which meaning the normal clinical research with medical device companies, it's a bit unique in that aspect. But yeah, it's a good mix of those things. So it uses all of my past experience, and then also kind of reinforces it with some project management aspects as well.
Right. So out of curiosity, since it seems like there's a little bit of a difference between working at a medical device type of company and Apple. And if you're able to speak to what you're currently doing, like your research around and your project management around, like what's an example of something that like you're working on?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I can't. I can't really comment on that, but I can talk about things I've done in the past, even just with other companies too. So, like my last company, I worked at this company called Stryker Neurovascular, which is in Fremont, California, and so they do a lot of stroke treatment products. And so, some of the products that I'd worked on, and also kind of like along with like the rest of the teams, were just a lot of stroke treatment products. So, for an example, if someone has an aneurysm, which is like if you imagine just like a tube, which is like your artery. And if there's a weak spot, it'll start to balloon because of things like high blood pressure, just all of these other risk factors. It'll start to balloon up, and you can imagine this kind of gradually and progressively worsening ballooning, which diverts blood flow away. And so one of the devices that we worked on, and helped bring to market, is this kind of like nitinol and platinum reinforced tube that diverts blood flow away from that aneurysm and then back into the main artery. And then eventually that ballooning or that aneurysm will occlude, so meaning that blood flow will stop going into there, which can, because if it were to continue to do that, it could lead to it to rupture, which can kill you, or also continue to give you stroke symptoms.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
You're saving lives.
Yeah, we kind of are. So kind of a crazy story too. So like when I first had started at Stryker, and became a CRA. So again, that progression of like the 1 to 2 years of CTC and another 2 years of being a senior before you're CRA, that's really just like the standard. And if you have the willingness to show that you can go above and beyond, like I went from CTC to CRA in about like 10 months, really. Like, wow. It was very quick, because I was just willing to put in the work. I obviously showed that I understood everything. But so when I was a CRA, part of the things that we have to do is like it's called like site qualification visits, meaning that like in the beginning of a study, before you bring on a hospital, you need to make sure that they like have the staff to do it. The doctors there that are part of the research staff have the experience to do this. And so I was, and this was one of my first times doing it. And so you have to sign all these waivers and everything before you can even get to the hospital. Like they make you sign all these documents in case, you interact with any patients, for HIPAA stuff. And I remember this, like I was, very young and ambitious, and instead of having a travel day the day before to like rest up and then, go to the hospital, whatever, in like, I don't know, it was like Kansas or something, I decided to take a red eye. So I woke up like at like, I don't know, like I left maybe like 11 p.m., landed around like 6, 7 a.m., got picked up and just immediately drove straight to that hospital to like do this whole presentation that I was my first time doing. So I was really nervous for this doctor because I've heard he was kind of difficult, or not difficult. He's very particular. There you go. Very particular. So I was doing my presentation, trying not to get too technical because I didn't fully, understand all of it. And I was accompanied by one of the sales reps in that territory. And so like, while I'm giving this presentation, this doctor is just like, kind of like looking down at his phone, kind of like texting a little bit. And I'm just like thinking like, I'm just boring this guy to death. Like I'm losing this guy. And he just like, and I'm getting towards the end of the presentation and he stops me. He's like, hey, I'm sorry, I have to go. I was like, oh, is everything okay? He's like, yeah, there's, there's someone getting brought into the, to the emergency surgical services right now because they're having a stroke. And I was like, oh, is like, yeah, do you want to watch? I was like, okay. So, yeah. So like literally right then and there. So, I remember so there's this like entire surgical suite, which like this whole room. And then behind that, there's like this, what's called the, what is it called? The control center, which like, it has a huge window that you can see into. And it's like this like reinforced like lead clear window because they do a lot of radiation. So I was just like watching this. And I remember this person getting brought in because they had had a pretty bad stroke. So they had what's called TIAs, which are like mini strokes, where they kind of like would get really confused, kind of start to lose their balance. And then all of a sudden they just had full on hemiparesis, which is like paralyzation on one whole side of their body, completely collapsed. And they were rushed to the hospital by their spouse. And so once they diagnosed that it was a stroke, rushed the person over to the surgical suite. And so I remember like that person was like laying there on the, on the operating table, kind of trying to talk to the doctor, explain what was going on. And they put them under for anesthesia. And you could just like see that their breathing was just very labored. And so apparently what had happened was that there was a blood clot that was going kind of like in through their brain, and it would get lodged somewhere, which would cause like this kind of temporary stroke. And then it would move again, and then it would get dislodged, and then their blood flow would be restored, and then it got stuck finally somewhere because the arteries get smaller. And so this doctor, he like within like it was like insane how quickly he moves. And so they make a really tiny incision, like a little cut in your femoral artery by your hip, and they use these like series of little like microcatheters, kind of like train tracks, if you can imagine that. And so within like 10 minutes, he had navigated just from this guy's leg, from this person's leg, navigated from there all the way up through like the renal artery, around the arch of the heart, through one of the sides of the neck, the carotid artery, all the way up to the brain, wherever, where that clot was. And so, and then they were able to deploy this, the doctor was able to deploy this kind of like wire mesh that opens up and kind of integrates with the clot, and then pulled it out. And this was all done within like 15, 20 minutes. And you can tell that as soon as they pulled the clot out and, released that restored that blood flow, the person on the table, like their breathing just like calmed down, was like back to normal. Their hand was like kind of starting to wiggle a little bit again. That was like previously paralyzed. And I'm just like sitting there watching this, just completely just like soaking it all in. Like this is like crazy to me. And I remember thinking at that point, like, wow, like I'm in the right field. Like, this is pretty cool. Like this guy, like he used one of our devices too at Stryker. He used a Trevo retriever, if you ever want to look that up on YouTube. And I was just like thinking like, dude, we made this device. This device literally just saved this guy's life. Like like the doctor was mentioning afterwards, like he's probably gonna make a full recovery because they got it so quickly in and out. And then as soon as he was done, he just walked back into the control room, and then he just sat back down. And he was like, so anyway, what were we working on? And I was like, whoa, yeah, it just like it was nothing. It was crazy. But I was like, immediately after seeing that, I was like, this is such a cool feel. Like the amount of people you can help with making these devices, bringing them to market, like how quick and how great these doctors are at like really navigating and doing all this stuff. I was like, this is insane.
So have you ever seen the show New Girl?
Yeah.
Do you remember Megan Fox?
I do. Yeah. She I think she was like a medical device sales person.
Yeah, I was just saying, I feel like you have related types of roles when you're at Stryker.
Mm-hmm.
That's like what reminds me of. I was like, so I'm like getting like a kind of like forming a picture in my mind, like you walking into like these doctor offices or hospitals, and talking to doctors. Really cool. So you flew in and like immediately went to this hospital and did your presentation, and then went into like a surgery, and were able to witness that. Yeah. So sounds like your trip went well.
Yeah, it went well. And and then immediately after, I went from there, drove to like another location, and it was and that second one went a lot more smoothly. But I just remember like that was like one of my first times ever being out on the road, and just like seeing that like live, like because when you're in the office so much, like it's hard to really picture what the end user looks like, or how much it really benefits people. And after experiencing that like firsthand, and then that was my first time, and then several times over the course of my career, I was able to witness a lot more stuff like that while I was at Stryker, which was just like amazing. So that continued to reinforce like, wow, this work that I'm doing like really means something, and it's like really helping just tons of people. Like it's insane.
So can you speak to whether it's Stryker or like when you first entered into this field, and this is for people who are maybe interested in getting into it and don't know what like pay looks like. So like let's say you're fresh out of college, you go into a role like this, or maybe you're just transitioning to it for the first time. What's like the salary range for someone who's entering into this field as like a clinical researcher, or like the job that you had starting out?
Yeah, so my original job, CTC, that was a bit a bit lower paying just because it is a more administrative role. And it depends, and there's a couple of different settings too. So there's a setting where you're at a sponsor, meaning a company that actually makes and manufactures the medical devices, versus a CRO, which is a clinical research organization, which is what sponsors will sometimes hire to staff and run and execute these studies. So from what I remember, I want to say it was like in the 60s to like 60s to like mid 70s, which wasn't horrible. And I think that was a pretty reasonable for like the amount of work I did. Like I think that was pretty substantial, or yeah, that was decent. And then as you start to get into the CRA role, that's where the pay really just starts to increase, especially since the amount of travel you do. So you're traveling probably 40 to 50% of your time.
Wow.
As a clinical research associate, and the pay jumps like pretty insane. So like depending on the setting, whether you're in a medical device versus pharma, which is actually doing like actual drug studies rather than like physical devices, and it can jump anywhere between honestly like 80 to like mid 200K range. Yeah, it's a very, very wide range, depending on what industry you go into, depending on the company itself, and a lot of them will have really great perks too. So like I remember, I think it was Stryker. They had a really great education package where if you wanted to go back to school, they would pay, I think it was like up to 15K a year for you to go back to school. Like they like you would, pay the school, and then once you show your grades, it would reimburse you for the cost up to 15K a year, which is pretty great. And on top of that, there's bonuses, you can get stocks, all the stuff. So yeah, it's pretty great.
Amazing. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're just raking in the dough then. For sure. Well, I appreciate you sharing, your insight in terms of like, ranges and like, what entry level looks like. And then when you kind of, get further into this type of career. So what would you say would make someone a good fit for this type of job? Maybe the job like at, entry level at Stryker, and then maybe even, after that, what would make someone a good fit for like the type of role that you're doing today? So feel free to like attack that any way you feel like.
Yeah, I'd say clinical research as a whole, even just for starting out, I would say someone who takes the initiative to really start to get any sort of education on it is huge. So for people who are out there who are interested, I would say looking at courses like, I think the company is called Barnett International. They have a lot of like introductory courses on like introduction to good clinical practices, which is the base foundation for any clinical researcher. You have to know that stuff inside and out. What it means to have good clinical practices, and what it means to enforce the regulations and rules behind that. So someone who can take that initiative, and when it comes to actually doing the job, I would say building good people skills is a huge thing, because especially if you want to get into a customer facing role like the CRA role, where you're actually interfacing with doctors who are the customers, like they're buying their hospitals are buying these several $1,000 medical devices. You have to have that good rapport. You have to be willing to kind of bite your tongue sometimes and be able to be a bit more flexible. I think that one of the other things that I'm personally not the best at is just organization in general, because when you're working on one or multiple studies, I would definitely say that you need to make sure you keep yourself organized. When you have like SOPs and investigational plans, and you say you have to finish certain documents within a certain amount of time, like when you have reports, when you go to a hospital and visit, making sure that you're able to do that, because there are pretty like people take, or the government and just the FDA takes research incredibly seriously. And so you don't want to find yourself being audited and on the wrong end of that, to where you don't have all this documentation to follow up and just show that you're actually doing things correctly. So that good attention to detail, that good organization is huge. Building that rapport, and I think you have to be a bit selfless at times, where you have to be willing to just you might be on the road for several weeks at a time. So there were 1 or 2 times where I was probably gone for 3 weeks out of the month.
Wow.
Constantly flying out somewhere, coming back home for like a day and a half, packing up, and then just going again and just continuing that. So and it can be pretty stressful, just so you have to be someone who can manage your stress well enough. You have good and healthy outlets to relieve that stress, so that way when you're doing your visits, you're fully there, because people, say people's livelihood are counting on that.
Wow. So organization, people skills and being able to communicate. I'm hearing like a lot of soft skills involved here, right? And some people say that, you can't teach soft skills, but I actually disagree. I think that like you can learn soft skills, if you are looking, through the right resources and, talking to people. I think having like a mentor really helps as well, right?
Yeah, definitely.
For sure. Now, what would you say would make someone a good fit for the job that you're in today?
Good fit. I think when you're in the industry, you hear a lot that like things change all the time. So um, someone who's willing to kind of roll with changes and not get too kind of fed up or too kind of caught up with the fact that there's always going to be changes all the time, and you just have to roll with it. You have to figure out immediately how to pivot, so we're going in this direction now. How do we now get to the same goal, or whatever the goal is that we're going for with this new direction, instead of getting upset. And even though it is frustrating, it can be frustrating sometimes. So someone who can be I don't know what's the word for that, like being very malleable. That's kind of
Flexible and adaptable.
there you go, adaptable. Yeah, you have to be very adaptable. If you're not adaptable, like 100%, you won't last.
Man, and that is something that like I preach all the time. Even at Year Up, we talk about having like a growth mindset and being open, being open to change.
Mhm.
That is so important when you are doing something new for the first time, job transitioning, jobs, for the first time. Having that open mind, being flexible and adaptable is so important. Now, I guess a more targeted question in relation to this, what makes you a good fit for this role? Why do you think, and feel free to not answer this, I guess, but why do you think that Apple hired you into the job that you're in right now? And I guess that would give people like a good, insight into what it takes to get a job like this.
That's a great question. If I had to speculate,
Mm,
I would guess that I was hired because I showed that I am adaptable
mm,
and that I'm a problem solver. Because even then, when I was hired, I had a decent amount of experience, but I mean, definitely, a lot of the people that I know, just in general, because the clinical research world is very tight knit group. Like after a while, you start to see the same people kind of over and over again, which is kind of funny, and a lot of them, like I'm on the much not more novice end of this, where I didn't have nearly as much experience as other people. I'm sure even just for other applicants that were probably applying for my job at the same time. So I think I just had to show that I can be flexible and being able to just really take what it is that about clinical research and figure out if someone were to ask you, how do you do it? How would you do this a completely different way, or okay, and just being able to challenge some of the assumptions that we always make in clinical research. Like, okay, this always takes this amount of time. Like, well, does it really? Like, okay, well, how would you get this done in a shorter amount of time? Being able to answer those kinds of questions and being able to be open enough and adaptable enough to see that how sometimes industry works doesn't always have to be the rule in terms of just like obviously nothing that would compromise patient safety or any sort of efficacy, but just me showing that I can be adaptable and I can learn to kind of just run with something and just be open to challenges.
Amazing. So moving us along, so we start getting into kind of like the wrapping up mode of this informational interview. So it sounds like being adaptable, and even like just your prior experience obviously came in, it helps a lot being able to speak to your prior experiences, right? You get like those behavioral interview questions, you always have to rely on like what you did, like at a place like Stryker, right, that make you a good fit. So it sounds like a combination of being adaptable, pulling from your prior experience, and also I forgot what the thing that you were just mentioning. Sorry, I just like mind blanked for a quick second there. But so it sounds like a combination of things that make you a good fit for the role that you're currently in right now. A lot of it has to do with like prior experience. What would you say is the hardest part about your current role?
In general, I don't know. I don't think there's anything really that's hard about most jobs. I would say there are things that can be like tedious about jobs, but like I don't think there's anything inherently hard. Like I think anyone can do my job. Anyone with enough training, anyone could do any of the jobs that I've ever done, like easily. Like I don't think there's anything that's really hard. Um, and I think just sometimes it could be stressful with just sometimes the amount of work you do and just trying to balance that. I think that could be difficult if you don't have good time management skills, if you don't have good
Mm.
kind of like just organization skills. I can see how that can quickly be difficult, but I don't think there's anything particularly like that's actually hard.
Okay, awesome. So sounds like there's. I mean, maybe like if I were to reframe it, it would be like what challenges do you face? It sounds like the time management. Like there's a lot coming your way. Your plate probably fills up a lot, and so your ability to manage that properly so that you're meeting deadlines, and meeting the expectations of your managers,
Mhm.
is taken care of. So with that, I do want to, anybody who is watching or anyone who will be watching from now until we wrap up, if you have any questions for Edgar or myself, primarily Edgar, obviously, because he's the guest here, about what he does and his experience, put it in the chat. If you're tuning in from YouTube Live, put it in the chat, or on Facebook, put it there as well, and then we'll do our best to answer those. So while that's happening, while people are potentially putting in any questions that they may have around this, we'll go into the last question here, and that question is, what advice would you give someone who wants to break into this type of career?
I would say that the biggest thing is to break into this career. I would say you have to be willing to start from whatever the bottom is of your respective job, because like so the progression that I showed is specifically just for the like actual clinical operations research role, because then there's also biostats, there's also data managers, there's also supply chain and actual engineering making these devices. You have to be willing to start somewhere, and don't get discouraged about kind of some of the timelines that people tell you, like, oh, it's typically a couple of years in here and there, then there before you get to somewhere. Because if you're willing to show that you're able to do the work, that you can do it well, then that's always a softer rule. So like something that I always do in every job that I have ever done is in the first like 6 or 7 months or so, I really learn as much as I can about the job, learn what it takes to do it like as best as possible, learn what the expectations are. And so if you kind of think about it in sort of kind of like a grade, like, okay, you know what it takes to in your job. If you were getting a grade, you know what it takes to get a C, right? So you know what it takes to get a B, the little bit of extra effort that it takes to get an A. And so making sure that I can figure out where that line is and make sure that I'm always doing really great quality work that's meeting my expectations. But then once you figure out where that boundary is, once you kind of are sustainable and that you're able to always produce really great work, I then start figuring out, okay, where else can I help? Like, what are some of the problems that this company in particular is facing? And let me just volunteer to just try and tackle some of these.
Mm.
There's always going to be like kind of random initiatives to bring up things like, I don't know, like let me see, at Stryker, there was like kind of initiatives to bring up just different platforms, different, sales, device management stuff, all this sort of stuff. And so every time someone would ask me, hey, Ed, do you have a couple of moments? Like, I'm trying to work on this side project for work and I need help. Like, yes, 100%. Even if I'm not interested in it, I'm 100%, because I don't know what I'll learn from it. I'm sure it'll benefit me in some way. And when it comes down to, the review period, this person's going to have my back, because not only because I helped them out because I wanted to help them out, but also because I knew that like I would learn something from it. And I can then say, okay, could I imagine myself in this person's role, and would I even like that role? And that's kind of how I gotten toward like kind of away from the CRA role and kind of more into like a mix between like managing kind of like just more operation focused. And so by I would recommend people do things like that. So like once you get yourself set up in a job, find other opportunities to kind of get even more experience in other roles, and that'll make you a super, indisposable employee. And so you can do that within clinical research, show you have that initiative, ask to take extra classes, and they'll usually reimburse for that, or they'll pay it up front for you, just to show you're really in it for so however much time that is, and keep doing that, and you'll eventually get to like wherever your end goal is.
I love that. So, a lot of this is being proactive, right? Taking initiative. It's like, even networking to learn about, other
Mhm.
opportunities, and taking advantage of, internal volunteer opportunities, or even external, right? That will, not only, help with solving problems internally at the company, but also that can maybe even build out your skill set outside of the company, further. Because you can do either one of them if you want. I think that
Yeah.
one thing that I wanted to mention as well on this note is, um, when you were mentioning working, yeah, solving like the company's problems, right? I think it's very much related to managing up, right? And kind of anticipating meeting the expectations of like your manager as well, right?
Mhm.
That takes being proactive, taking initiative, learning from your manager. This is what we like tell our students at Year Up, right? It's like manage up, right? Try to anticipate what your manager needs, and solve like their problems. What do they have on their plate that you can kind of be proactive and see if you can support with that. So I think like what you were saying is like even a step further, like what can you do in terms of helping the company, solve whatever challenges that they have.
Yeah, and a related question to this would be, so there's that of breaking into the career, but if you want to last in this career,
Mm,
I would say, and just honestly, really in any career, you have to be willing to speak up. You have to be willing, if you have a concern, like you have to be willing to go with it. Like a lot of the times, um, the companies are relying on you to know, for example, these regulations inside and out. And if something doesn't feel right, like you should feel able to speak up without having to feel for your fear for your job or anything like that. And that's something that I've practiced the past several years, and I've been getting really great at. Is if I don't agree with something, or I think just something doesn't sound right, I'm always the first one to speak up, even for people, on my team. If it's just me by myself, just kind of like, kind of battling, kind of like going head to head with someone on something, if I don't particularly agree with, like, that's how you will last in any job. Because a lot of the times, like, people might have a misunderstanding or misconception, or just not fully understand, people are relying on you to be able to speak up, and that's how you'll last outside. Otherwise you're just going to kind of sit back, sit quiet, and feel like you're not being heard, but you also, need to be able to speak up.
yeah, advocate for yourself for
Yep.
sure.
Hmm.
Love it. So I think we are at 38. So I appreciate you for coming in here and talking about your experience, what you do at Apple and what you've done in your prior experience as well at Stryker, how you got to where you are today. It's been amazing kind of hearing your story and being able to share that with people who are interested in this type of career, right? And I think everyone's career is different. Everyone has different career trajectories. Maybe someone is like seasoned in their career, but they want to get into this. Now they have like kind of like a way of learning and consuming, like how can I get to a place like this, or like what does that job look like. It looks like there's a lot of travel involved. It looks like there's a lot of speaking and communicating with doctors, when we were working at Stryker. So that is, I feel like, gems, gold for people who are looking to get into a place like this. So that being said, I appreciate you for coming in here and talking to us for our April Career Clinic. Um, I think the last thing that I can plug on my end here is this evening on Clubhouse. If you are on Clubhouse, I am hosting a mock interview room. It's called Fang and Big Tech for anyone who watches this. I do it on a weekly basis, Thursdays, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. And we have people from Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, all big tech companies coming in and helping job seekers, providing feedback and helping them practice interviews. So those rooms get up to like 200 people. and we are just, weighing in, because a lot of times job seekers don't get that feedback. In the actual process, a lot of times you don't really get like that feedback on what you're doing right and how you can improve. So this is an opportunity for these professionals at these great companies to participate and support. So Edgar, if you're available on a weekly basis, Thursday, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m., we got people coming in and supporting job seekers. We're bringing them to the stage, and they get to practice, get feedback.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I am free Thursdays actually. That would be pretty awesome. And I would say actually one thing I do like about that too is like something I've always continued to do with that I would advocate others to do is, if you can, like if you're at somewhere in your career where you think like something, even if you feel like it's not much, like mentor someone, just even just reach out to someone, be open to kind of listening at hearing what people are interested in and just helping them guide something, because you'll never know what sticks with them and like where that kind of takes them. So yeah, that's awesome.
Amazing. Again, appreciate you. So we are going to sign off here. Thank you everyone for coming in, listening in. Appreciate you. We will actually be back in June. I'm going to take May off from the Career Clinic because I've been doing this since November, like every month. I think
that's pretty good.
Like 6 months or so. So I'm going to take May off, just for recharge the batteries. So we'll be back in June, and we'll be bringing a panel of career coaches together. So look forward to that. Thank you everyone for watching, and we are done for today.
Thank you.